Have you ever wondered whether the very things we cling to for beauty and dignity could slowly become the poison that destroys us? Queen Althea of the Northern Empire, once the most admired woman of her age, lived behind a mask so perfect, so radiant, that no one dared to doubt her eternal youth. But hidden beneath that porcelain facade was not the glow of power, it was decay, rot, and an invisible hand dragging her toward death. Althea was not the first ruler to guard her image with obsession, yet she may have been the only one who allowed her own vanity to kill her, drop by drop, day after day. What began as a way to cover scars turned into a ritual more binding than any religious oath. The very powders she trusted to preserve her throne would ultimately carve her tomb. This paradox of beauty as both shield and assassin is what made her story so haunting. And to understand why she clung to her deadly mask, we must return to her childhood, where blood, betrayal, and fear planted the seeds of her obsession. Althea's earliest memories were not of lullabies or gentle warmth, but of screams echoing through the palace courtyard. She was only 6 years old when her mother was dragged before the execution block, accused of treachery and witchcraft. The crowd gathered to witness justice, but to the little girl it was not justice, it was horror. As the axe fell, Althea stood motionless, her small hands clenched so tightly that her nails broke the skin of her palms. She wanted to cry, to collapse into despair, yet some instinct told her that weakness was death. From that moment on, she trained herself to hold her face like stone, to let no one glimpse her fear, her sorrow, or her longing. In the aftermath, whispers in the palace corridors reminded her daily, "The eyes of the people will always judge you." For a child, this was not advice, but a curse. Althea learned to survive by hiding her true self, crafting a mask of composure long before she ever touched the white powders that would one day enslave her. That day by the scaffold shaped her destiny. The trauma etched invisible scars deeper than any knife could cut, and these scars would later drive her to seek a perfection that did not exist. The mask she wore in adulthood was not just made of powder and rouge, it was the mask of a frightened girl who once saw her mother die and swore never to let the world see her broken again. 2 decades later, the empire nearly lost its queen to a fever that swept like wildfire across the land. Red blisters scarred Althea's face, leaving her once flawless skin pitted and uneven. When the fever broke and she rose from her sickbed, she could not recognize the woman staring back at her in the mirror. The scars, though natural to any survivor, were to her an unbearable humiliation, courtiers whispered. Some avoided looking at her directly, as if her blemished face were a sign of divine punishment. The queen, who had once commanded respect with a glance, now feared the mirror itself. Desperate, she turned to the alchemists of her court. They offered her a miraculous solution, a fine white powder that would cover every scar, leaving her face smooth as porcelain. Althea embraced it as if it were salvation. Yet with each stroke of powder, she also made a bargain with death. Here lies the haunting question. If you bore scars that stripped you of confidence, would you not grasp at anything, no matter how dangerous, to erase them? Althea did not hesitate. What began as a cosmetic became her obsession, the ritual by which she reclaimed her throne, her pride, and her fragile sense of invincibility. Soon, her mornings transformed into ceremonies more sacred than prayer. Servants arrived at dawn with bowls of powder and pots of vermilion paste. Layer upon layer was applied, until no blemish remained, only the pale, glowing mask of youth. Each day, she emerged reborn not as the weary woman she truly was, but as an eternal monarch, untouched by time. But behind this ritual was fear. Anyone who glimpsed her bare face risked punishment, even death. Her mask was not simply beauty, it was armor. The powder concealed not only scars, but vulnerability, doubt, and the gnawing terror that age would strip her of authority. Over time, her attendants noticed the toll. The queen's skin beneath the mask grew raw and inflamed. The powders caked into cracks, and yet she demanded more, always more. She had built her reign upon the illusion of perfection, and illusions, once created, must never falter. What began as a cure for scars had become a prison. Each morning, as the powders settled into her pores, Queen Althea was not merely adorning herself, she was burying herself alive, one layer at a time. Years passed, and the mask that once gave Althea power began to devour her from within. Her hands, once steady enough to sign decrees and raise a sword, now trembled uncontrollably. Words slipped from her memory, and she would pause mid-sentence, staring blankly as if the thought had been stolen away. Her teeth loosened and blackened until her once radiant smile became a grimace of decay. Servants whispered of a strange odor clinging to her breath, a stench that could not be masked even by perfumes imported from across the seas. In the solitude of her chambers, she laughed and cried at once, speaking to her reflection as though her dead mother gazed back from the glass. Sometimes she scolded it, sometimes she begged for forgiveness, her voice breaking like that of a frightened child. The courtiers began to murmur, "Our queen is no longer herself." They dared not speak openly, but fear crept into their eyes. Could it be madness? Could it be witchcraft? Or was it something darker, a slow poisoning that came not from enemies, but from her own vanity? Despite her decline, the empire could not allow the world to see a broken queen. Painters were ordered to immortalize her with flawless skin, rosy cheeks, and eyes full of fire. No artist dared disobey. Those who hinted at truth saw their works destroyed, their careers ended. Audiences with Althea became carefully staged performances. Torches were dimmed, shadows drawn long, and visitors kept at a distance. From afar, the illusion held there she stood, radiant, untouchable. Up close, the truth was unbearable. Shaking hands hidden beneath silk, a wig concealing patches of baldness, and beneath the layers of powder, raw skin struggling to breathe. Her courtiers enforced the charade with ruthless precision. To admit the queen was failing was to admit the empire itself was vulnerable. So the mask had to remain, no matter the cost. But how many of us do the same? How often do we hide behind masks of our own making, smiles that cover exhaustion, confidence that conceals fear? Queen Althea's tragedy was extreme, but the echoes of her story reach into every life that has ever chosen illusion over truth. By the closing years of her reign, the powders and paints that had once been her salvation had transformed her body into a battlefield. Her hair fell in brittle clumps, leaving her nearly bald beneath the ornate wigs. Angry sores bloomed across her skin, oozing beneath the thick white layers that she demanded be applied ever more heavily. Servants wept silently as they obeyed her commands. Some mornings she shrieked, clawing at her own face when the powders stung her raw flesh. Other days she sat like a statue, eyes glazed, as they built the mask anew upon her ruined skin. The more grotesque her appearance beneath the mask became, the more she clung to the illusion. She could not admit weakness, not to her court, not to her people, and certainly not to herself. She would rather suffer in silence, rather rot in secret, than let the empire see a queen growing old. Her chambers reeked of incense, perfume, and decay. And yet, every evening when she emerged to greet her council, her face shone pale and perfect, a vision of immortality. Only those closest to her knew that this vision was purchased with agony, each layer of powder pressing her further into a living tomb. As winter closed its grip on the empire, Althea's decline could no longer be hidden within ritual and artifice. The sores spread, her body wasted, and the scent of death filled her private halls. Attendants muffled their breaths with cloth as they entered, yet none dared speak the truth aloud. On her bed of velvet, the queen trembled with fever. Her eyes burned red, darting wildly, and she whispered names long forgotten. Again and again, she called for her mother, as if the woman executed half a century ago still lingered nearby, waiting to comfort her child. Seizures racked her frame. She clutched at the bedposts, her body twisting violently, as though unseen hands sought to drag her soul into the darkness. Physicians offered herbs and prayers, but nothing eased her torment. The palace grew silent with dread. Ministers delayed decisions, uncertain whether their queen would awaken each morning. For the first time in her long reign, the empire seemed leaderless, its destiny suspended in the fragile breath of a woman consumed by her own mask. In the final weeks, when strength had all but deserted her, Althea left behind a single letter, scrawled in a trembling hand. It was discovered by a loyal attendant who dared not speak of it until years later. The words were uneven, at times incoherent, yet chilling in their clarity. "I have killed myself with beauty. Each day I drank poison in powder and paint, believing it was my crown. But there are those who fed my vanity, who painted me into the grave before I knew I was dying." Was this the delirium of a dying woman, or a confession that her decline had been no accident? Some whispered of conspirators at court who had encouraged her ritual, knowing the powders were deadly. Others dismissed it as the ramblings of a poisoned mind. Still, the question lingers. Have you ever trusted something or someone so deeply, only to realize too late that it was destroying you? The tragedy of Althea's final words lies in their universal truth. Betrayal often comes dressed as devotion. On a cold March morning, Queen Althea's body convulsed one final time. Witnesses said her mask cracked as she fell still, the thick powder splitting to reveal the ruined flesh beneath. Her once magnificent hairpiece slipped away, exposing the bald and blistered scalp she had hidden for years. The attendants recoiled. Beneath the illusion lay not a radiant queen, but a withered husk, a woman destroyed by her own pursuit of perfection. Yet, when the body was prepared for burial, every flaw was hidden once more. Layers of powder restored the illusion. Wigs and jewels crowned her head. To the people, she was presented as serene, beautiful, eternal. The official record declared she had died peacefully, a monarch untouched by time. The truth that she had been consumed by poison of her own making was buried with her. Thus, her legend lived on, but not her reality. The empire remembered her as the eternal queen, while the palace walls whispered a darker tale, that vanity and power had joined hands to strangle her in silence. And so Queen Althea became not only a ruler of history, but a warning, a ghostly reminder that the masks we build to protect ourselves may one day become the cages in which we perish.